VenomousStare, the John Rocker of StarCraft 2, returning with another exceptionally exciting replay commentary. This time in the bottom right we have Prototype, the solid North American Zerg. And the protagonist of this game is going to be one of my good friends, Matt Foxer Harris, an incredibly talented American micro-Terran who is, simply put, a master at the art of marine splitting. This is the sort of person who can really make you look bad with micro. And he's a nice guy, and he got an insurance license, not realizing how much of a joke the industry was, just like me. So, big shout out to Matt Foxer Harris, a kind, intelligent, handsome man with a plethora of integrity. Speaking of integrity, we have a Reaper here checking for the integrity of the Zerg base, picking off a Ling, making sure no fast Ling Bane all-in is coming. This is very, very standard. And what do we see here? A CC is about to finish for Foxer, but he's made another CC in his main very quickly. Now, this isn't officially the innovation build, but in many circles, this extremely fast third CC into Hellion can very loosely be referred to as the innovation style, because this is how innovation has played since 2013. A fast third command center, Hellions, and really this is how we saw innovation lose his first GSL finals to Soul Key in a reverse sweep. The only reverse sweep in GSL history, and probably my favorite GSL finals ever. It's just an incredible series. Those matches occurred the night I graduated high school. Overlord is going to try to camp out around the upper part of the main here. This is very natural whenever your Overlord gets pushed up the third. A lot of Zergs will leave an Overlord at the third, put one by the natural, and then put another up in a scout spot. Some will simply put the Overlord that is at the third by the scout spot. And the reason that this is sort of known as the innovation build is you see Cloak boot up, and presumably a Banshee going to start here as soon as the Foxer has the gas. There's a reason that this is known as the innovation build. This is the cleanest, safest build you can do. This is the build that really sort of proves the fact that yes, I think I'm better than you as a macro player, and I'm going to play like this. If you're a solid, straight-up Terran, these are the sort of bread-and-butter builds you should be going for. Almost all of Innovation's TVZs are based around some sort of 6 Hellion opener. Now, there are a ton of different variations of this build. There's the standard 6 Hellions with bio follow-up. There's the standard 6+ Hellions with Banshee. There is the innovation build 8 Hellion with Raven that became very popular a few months ago. However, in general, the concept of playing a defensive macro style with Hellion Banshee is one that is really exemplified by innovation, as you see a lot of roachling pressure coming in here as Prototype is trying to break our American hero Matt Foxer Harris, who is displaying beautiful micro. This is what you want to do. Shoot with the Hellions, run away, shoot with the Hellions, run away, but when the roaches come, that's absolutely brutal. The Hellions, of course, are meant to limit the damage of Lings. They do bonus damage to light units and splash damage. They're terrible against roaches. The Banshee is meant to counter Roach Ravager, but when there are a plethora of units at your front door as Terran, you're in this weird situation where your Banshee really can't kill anything quick enough, and you have to have 2+ Banshees to hold any sort of builds like this. It really becomes a problem when there are so many Lings, and if you have one Banshee, the Banshee would just sort of fire at Lings over and over, ineffectually not killing anything. And an absolutely brutal 27 workers are slaughtered for our friend Matt Foxer Harris, and I'm going to have to bring in the Semitic superstar Howard Cosell to break down this situation. Howard, what do you think about the current worker situation in this game?
Well, Venomous, I am glad that you brought me in. This is an abhorrent scenario for the Terran player. He is down almost double workers, and we see this scenario, especially before he replenished. Now, of course, the third command center will enable the Terran player to recuperate more quickly, and the double wall-in with engineering bays is an excellent addition for our friend Matt Foxer Harris. Alright, Howard, you don't have to turn it into a fucking Monday Night Football cast. We get it. Foxer's walled in here. This is beautiful to see. Remember, before we saw him make double bunker here, and that was sort of one of those day late and a dollar short type reactions, as a Banshee picks up 5 kills here, as the previous 7 kills were on the defense. In general, whenever you get cheesed by Zerg as Terran with these sort of roach-centric builds, you're going to really run into a handful of follow-up builds. The follow-up all-in, which I would say is most common and easiest to deal with, although if you take a lot of damage from the first attack, sometimes those can be the hardest to deal with, as you see Foxer venturing out and taking his third. This is exceptional Zerg tactics from Prototype to drop creep on the third. Zerg players copy this every single versus Terran game you play. Notice that Prototype's upgrades are ahead as well, so Matt Foxer Harris is definitely suffering from falling behind early in this incredibly enthusiastic and entertaining macro game. Alright, Howard, we get it. You're in the fucking studio. But here's Foxer pushing with the slight supply advantage, and if we hit the little G key here, we can see the upgrades have yet to come in. And if we hit the structures tab, we can fuck it and see that there is no armory, so these Hellions will not turn into Hellbats, which would probably make this push game ending, quite frankly. But we can see Foxer pressing forward here, the American micro player focusing the Banes. Here we go, as Foxer runs backwards and tries to pick up and bean dip as he sees between the Queen, Ling, and everything else. He's going to have trouble, but he drops behind the mineral line. This is textbook Terran play. You want to just keep dropping in spots that are annoying and abusive and push, pressure the Zerg and really get under their skin. But unfortunately, right as Foxer's push was attempting to be executed, the Zerg finished 1-1, which makes it exceptionally difficult to really break the Zerg with the push if you're at 0-0. It's an interesting dichotomy that we see from the upgrades as far as the way that ZVT works, because both players, I feel like, sort of feel like, oh, I have to have the upgrade advantage, as you see Foxer snipe a couple Banes and run away. I have to have the upgrade advantage to do damage. You see a couple Lings here spotting Prototype, that's brilliant. And I just want to sort of take a step back and observe the fact that, let's picture what happened there. Foxer ran in, sniped a couple Banes, and ran away. Now, if both players are perfect, we can come to the conclusion that Terran really has the opportunity to take more advantages with the speed, medevac, and all the splash that they have. And really, if we just look at the basic dichotomy of the matchup, Terran, a lot of the times, is going to be the one putting pressure on the Zerg. You're really not going to see in normal TVZ Zergs being aggressive just right out of the gate trying to kill Terran. Terran is very hard to kill in the early mid game because of the Hellion and the Widow Mine and the Liberator. Foxer intelligently cancels a base there, and he's going to go for a tried and true Terran tactic of pushing on one side and dropping the other. To see a droopy stem here, Foxer killing some Lings, but a plethora of Lings are going to defend here for Prototype. And if we look at the 2-2 timing here, Matt Foxer Harris is in a plethora of trouble as the Zerg is quickly teching into Hive, and Foxer really needs to do some damage here as he's falling behind tech-wise. Great micro here from Foxer to test the Zerg multitask. Lots of mines is boom, boom, boom. A whole lot of fucking nothing. Tremendously disappointing mine hits there for Foxer, as the verbal cue of boom, boom, boom was far more exciting than the actual explosions of the mines themselves, as a droopy pickup occurs here for our American Terran. And Foxer's going to pick up and say, oh crappa, that's a hex off, and re-land and presumably make another PF. But as far as pressure goes, this is perfect from Foxer. We see a little bit down low, a little bit up top. Terran players, this is what you want to fucking copy. You want to pressure Zerg in multiple spots, because Masters level players might be able to deal with this harass at a relatively high level, but if you're in Diamond or below,
these drops are just going to rip the Zerg apart. You're not going to have to micro like this and do shift fucking move away commands or multi-prong marine splitting. As we can tell, my drinking has already occurred in this matchup, just as Matt Foxer Harris' stem timing and beautiful micro has occurred. But we can see whenever Foxer pushes in at one spot, he's going to go in at the other. And this is basic Terran versus Zerg that you should emulate. And when I say basic, I do not mean to disparage or degrade our American hero. Alright, Howard, thank you. We know. Whenever you say distract, it has to do with the basic concept of StarCraft that your screen can only be in one place at once, and that you really have to focus, and this is the most intense game that you could possibly play, the game that invented esports, and quite frankly, it doesn't get any better than this, as Matt Foxer Harris is just going to run into the south side as he pressures the north. Beautiful micro here, look at those splits, as he splits a Marine in each individual little group for each Bane, and that's incredible. And more importantly, right when he was doing that attack, he's going to press up on the other side and clear a creep. And Prototype has done a pretty damn good job defending these drops as far as having his army where it needs to be. Foxer going for the Widowmine upgrade, and our Zerg friendo is going to clean up this top right drop as he techs into 3-3, Lurker, Adrenal Glands, Overlord Speed, and Burrow. So it's not looking that good for our Terran friend, but Matt Foxer Harris is continuing to aggress upon the middle part of the map. And one thing that I wanted to talk about was Artosis' Brood War Tournament Ascension. As we see, Foxer is going to be surrounded here. A couple mines going down. Hydroling screaming forward. This really is the big engagement. Foxer doesn't have a drop anywhere like most of the game. And if you fight Zerg straight up into Hydroling Lurker, it's not going to be fun for you. So, although Foxer has been doing a good job sort of limiting Zerg's tempo, he's having a hard time breaking into the Hive tier pressure. And if we go to the upgrades tab as well as the production tab, as I'm sure if I click enough keys I'll finally get there, 3-3 not started for our American hero Matt Foxer Harris. Once this 3-3 finishes for Zerg, it can be very difficult for Terran to continue to aggress and engage. Now this is particularly true whenever the Ultralisk and the Infestor is involved. But if the Zerg player goes for another set of units, then all of a sudden they can be picked apart much more easily. Notice that the Zerg is going for an extended Hydra Bane style here, and is getting the Lurker upgrades, so it's very clear the Zerg wants to play a Lurker-centric style, which can be exceptionally good against Bio. The weird thing about Lurkers, though, is they don't really combo well with Lings. The Lurker is meant to do extended fights, sort of like a Roach Hydra army. So if you do this sort of Roach, Roachless style, where it's mass Ling Bane and some Lurkers, it doesn't really work stylistically, because you want to run in with all your Ling Bane, which will sort of insta-die, and then you burrow your Lurkers, which are meant to do an extended fight. And Foxer's going to stem away here as he attacks the top right, and just continue to run away. Notice Foxer's gone very Marauder heavy, and has started 3-3. This will help him a lot. Remember, if he had gone pure Marine here, this would be such a difficult army to deal with. As you see a plethora of Bane Lurker come in here and almost kill the PF, and they do with a little bit of Hydra Fire. But thankfully for Foxer, he will defend as a lot of Hydras go down. Remember, whenever you do this Zerg style, you do prioritize the Ling upgrades. So if you're not diligent about also getting range attack upgrades at this time, you sort of put yourself in this situation, as you see a drop in the top right, killing a plethora of drones, where you're not really able to fight with the Terran in an extended game if you're going for a heavy Lurker style, because your Lurkers and Hydras don't do any damage to +3 armor, plus mech units, plus air units. The Zerg player has gone for an incredibly mid-game focused style, and Foxer has gone for a style that is very hardy in the mid-game. This is a big reason why Foxer was able to survive. He delayed his upgrades, he went for extra units, he put the pressure on. And Prototype is in this sort of awkward position where he has a bunch of units that are best at defending, but he knows he's a little bit ahead and doesn't want to defend, and the Terran is outscaling him. Remember, the Zerg here is just an absolute fraud in terms of teching up. He doesn't have Ultra Tech or Broodlord Tech ready, and Foxer's going to deny this third, it's like his fifth. But essentially, what we see in this style is that the Zerg is going for a very mid-game focused I want to survive style, and the Terran is going for a style that not only does well against that, but scales well too. So Foxer is continuing to drop these exterior bases and limit the Zerg going out of control, and pressuring the middle to make sure the lurkers don't commit to a game-ending engagement, or even for that matter clean up his army in the way that the Zerg wants it to. So Matt Foxer Harris has really put on a clinic here of distracting Zergs and playing around lurkers. Notice how he's gotten a lot more tanks after the fact that the lurkers have been revealed. The way that you deal with lurkers is pressure your Zerg opponent, drop them, and make tanks. You don't just sit in your base and be idle, and you don't just make a bunch of bios. You see, the lurkers are going to run in here, and Foxer will scan and see, well, not that much of my stuff is in range, so I'll just chill by my tanks. And sure enough, the Zerg is forced to retreat. And it gets to this really weird, crappy point as Zerg, whenever you spend way too much time on lair, where you can't really end the game versus the tech units that Terran has, but you don't really have the units to keep up with the macroing either. So you're stuck in this terrible scenario where you're about like half trying to slam Ling Bane into stuff, but you don't really have the ability to kill all of his army because he has factory units. So even though you have lurkers, you're just going to burrow them in vain anyway. And suddenly we see Matt Foxer Harris is starting to take a huge supply advantage. Has no gas and over mining at that base. Nothing going on there, and this base just up. Of course, this was a product of Foxer's incredible drop micro and continuously pushing his Zerg opponent in both spots like this. And this low amount of minerals mixed with this oversaturated base tells us all we need to know. Notice that Foxer drops right down here down low, pulls the entire army, and is clearly thinking about dropping top right. And also, Foxer almost never overextends or attacks someplace and loses all of his stuff. Usually he attacks, does the most amount of damage possible, and retreats. Now this is the sort of style you want to see against Zerg. SCV pull coming here as Foxer is a little bit scared. Has to lift his CC, and he pulls a lot of workers as he brings his army down. And he will kill most of it and presumably bring his CC back. It does get a little bit scary when the Zerg has lurkers and vipers, but you do sort of realize you get to the point where you can completely outfight their army even with vipers if you have the upgrade advantage. And again, Foxer is just continuing to drop and harass anytime there's pretty much anything going on the map. Another thing worth noting is that ASL has returned. ASL is a basically Brood War tournament that everybody loves and is the Brood War Classic. And Afrika told Tasteless and Artosis they couldn't cast it live, but they negotiated for the VOD rights, and now they're going to be casting the VOD. Also, Artosis' independent Brood War tournament, Ascension, has recently launched and is in a position where it's getting a ton of views and is going into the finals very soon, so make sure you check that out if you haven't. Foxer will set up here at this very highly contested base, snipe a plethora of banelings, and all of a sudden, it doesn't look like Viper Lurker is that good when you lose that many lurkers. They aren't even in upgrades at this time, but if we just look at the two things that the players have to work with, Foxer has too many tanks. This sort of ground army, I'm going to go into Vipers to pull your tank style, is really only good when they make like 5 tanks or less. And we have a plethora of tanks here for Foxer as the Zerg will try to engage. Prototype going to try to run up in Blinding Cloud, but see, this is what I'm talking about. You Blinding Cloud 5 tanks, 5 more there. and all of a sudden your lurker Hydra Ling army is fucking garbage. And you just try to ram your head against the wall, but when it comes to Terran splash versus Zerg units like this that aren't really meant to fight against this excessive amount of splash, it gets brutal. And we see Zerg, who thought he has had the advantage for the last 20 minutes, is going to sort of do this thing that many Zergs who lose games to great macro players do, where they push, they get run off by tanks and other supporting units, and then they try to remake a little, they push again, it goes a little bit worse, they wait a couple minutes, make more, they push again, it goes a little worse, and suddenly they're way behind. It's 166 to 187. And that is absolutely brutal for a Zerg player, Prototype. Matt Foxer Harris is just doing an incredible job here. Notice he's making 2 more CCs, going into Ghost. And Foxer's just continuing to slam away at the creep spread and in general the map control of the Zerg player Prototype. So make sure that you tune into the ASL broadcast by Nick and Dan as Vipers come in and pull the tanks. This is exactly what the Zerg was looking for, is 4 tanks get pulled, but again, you still can't ramrod in and finish whenever someone has this much defense as the intelligent and talented Matt Foxer Harris has made 3 factories. He knows how to deal with lurkers. See, the worst thing you can do against lurkers is just make mass bio. You want to have liberators, especially with range, and tanks to deal with this. Foxer wants to continue to press up into the top right side of the map, and really the name of the game here is just to lure the Zerg units into his money units. The Zerg really doesn't feel good about attacking anywhere but this top right, where there are no planetaries and he has this whole army, but unfortunately for him, Foxer is ready. So this is sort of one of those weird scenarios where one player knows his win condition, but is aware of the fact that the game is rapidly slipping away from him. So he just sort of tries to brashly make decisions, as another incredible drop occurs here, as this is a big part of how Foxer was able to occur an advantage and stay alive. There's the constant dropping. And Ling Hydra will come in here to the bottom left and deal some severe damage against Foxer. Remember, he has so much of his stuff in the top right, it's very hard to move a bunch of siege tanks. Zerg player will stutter step forward and snipe that CC. That's a huge win for Zerg. And this is just sort of the basic thing you want to do as Terran, is if you do get pushed in a spot, you want to counter push with your army that's out there and snipe creep. And again, we see that Matt Foxer Harris is trying to deal with the plethora of Ling Hydra with largely bio, and suddenly the Ghosts come over. The Ghost is going to be an increasingly larger part of the story, as we see an almost 2011 dedication to the Ghost versus Zerg late game. Remember, back in 2011, Ghost Snipe did bonus damage to all biological massive units, which was the Ultra and the Broodlord. We saw this a lot in that GSL Finals MMA versus, I think it was Lenok, where MMA, anytime that Lenok goes into a late game Zerg army, he just goes Ghost, because Ghosts counter both Ultras and Broodlords. And we see a ton of Ghost use here, as more importantly they're used to EMP the Vipers here, and the Vipers are just going to run forward impotently, as well as the Hydras who run into a tank line with bio. And back in the day, Ghosts were used for mass snipe against bio units, and now they're used against the Zerg spellcaster, the Viper, which is brutal against tanks. And we can see Foxer trying to siege up into a nice little position here and force the Terran, or the Zerg rather, to attack up into him. And we see a lot of scans here just trying to figure out what exactly does he all have. His Prototype is ahead in supply, Baneling screaming forward, but Ling Bane just does not really scale very well up into this tier 3 portion of the game. And whenever you have Vipers, you end up losing them, and then you have to try to remake them, but the energy is such a joke that you just sort of waste your time and make the Viper do an incoming push, which just has to get energy anyway. I vastly, and I mean holistically and absolutely, prefer the consumability of the Defiler in Brood War, because the ability to just eat a Ling and get a bunch of energy is way more beneficial to Zerg than having to sit there with your Chode in your hand and build fucking Evo chambers in the middle of the map just to fucking consume them. That's so dumb. And in general, the clunkiness and energy mechanic of the Viper is one of the things that makes it a boring unit. A boring horseshit unit that people are tired of seeing. And oftentimes, really what Zerg's late game comes down to is, wow, our late game was so fucking bad that we just had to have something to try to latch onto, whether it be the Broodlord or the Infestor or anything else. Zerg's late game, it was a joke for the majority of this game's life, so you just really gotta let that sink in and consider that, well, if the Ultra's terrible and they know they're going Broodlord, then why don't you just make more Ghost? We saw Terran players, when Ghost would just kill everything with Snipe, they would make a shitload of them, but whenever it was the Broodlord Infestor era in 2012, suddenly the Ghost was an unusable unit as the third base gets broken for the Zerg. This is a very common theme that we see from Terran players where as soon as a build or strat falls out of favor for like a second, it's all of a sudden unusable as a ton of skill bans come in, and Foxer runs away and has so much stuff that the bans don't do a lot, but suddenly lurkers come up, more bans come up, Vipers as well. Vipers get EMP'd as they throw a blinding cloud out, and because of the terrain of this map, Foxer cannot easily run in and punch out either of these corner bases. You'll probably see him push into the natural and maybe siege the tanks. As Foxer continues to scan and clear creep, so important versus Zerg. Liquid TLO once said that creep spread is the most important element of ZVT, and notice this 3 factory tank setup for Foxer is just doing him wonders. Not only is it inhibiting the Zerg from engaging, but it's preventing the Vipers from being the end-all be-all, as you see another EMP go down as Ling screaming here with some Banes, but because of the incredible EMP use of Foxer, the Zerg player was never able to get those devastating abducts or those devastating blinding clouds off. So even though Snipe really wasn't used at all, Foxer just did a fucking excellent job figuring out a way to make the Ghost useful. And notice that he did get the Ghost range upgrade for the EMP ability. You love to see that, because obviously that was a Verse Protoss upgrade. And intelligently he'll load his tanks up into medevacs and then drop them right on this cliff that can pretty much oversee not only the base but the retreat and entry path from both sides. In general, Terrans putting their tanks into medevacs is something that is underrated. A nice blinding cloud here is really going to stop Foxer from decimating everything. He loses half of his tanks, but it is just such an insane spot for Terran to be able to set up at. And without these minerals being broken through, in the same way it inhibits Terran from pushing this third and inhibits Zerg from flanking. So now, no matter how many Vipers get made, Foxer is at such an absurd advantage that he can just continue to push and snipe exterior bases. And I'm sure at this point, Foxer will just do one committed push to a certain base and finish the game out. Notice 23 workers died there. If we go to the income tab, Foxer is just really dumpstering the Zerg. And this is really the point of no return for Zerg, is when Terran is out expanding you, you don't have any active workers really, and there is no win left in your sails. This is just a brutal spot to be a Zerg, because you really have the least amount of comeback mechanics as far as the 3 races goes, especially against Terran. Your hands are really tied, and oftentimes your comeback mechanics like the Lurker or the Infestor, they're going to be revealed before you're really so far behind where you need them. And this is just, even though Foxer loses a handful of workers there, this is just one of those games where the Terran player just has to do one last push to kill the Zerg, because even though the Zerg is running around and trying to be tricky and irritating and stall the game out, it's just one of those brutal scenarios where he doesn't have much creep left and he doesn't really have the units to defend. So we can jump it up to a little bit of point 2 as the Vipers get EMP'd again and the 4th base dies, and when I say 4th base I mean 5th or exterior base. And Foxer is just going to continue to use tech units in addition to bio very intelligently. Notice Foxer has been very much about limiting the corner bases this game and not so much about running all of his shit in and dealing the killing blow. As right here I think he's going to punch out the last sort of side base here for our Zerg player. And even though the lurkers will burrow and there are some spellcasters here, how many fucking blinding clouds can you cast? They really don't last that long, and you're not in a position where you can fight. So prototype GG's, and Artosis brings the incredible Ascension tournament back. Sub for more.